The checkpoint smelled like diesel and last night's rain. That particular combination, burnt fuel soaking into wet gravel, was the smell of every morning in Kandahar, and I had stopped noticing it somewhere around week 3. By week 11, it had become the smell of being awake, the smell of still being here. I was standing post at Gate 7, which the guys had unofficially renamed Gate Boredom because nothing ever happened there. It was a secondary access point on the southern perimeter of FOB Salerno, the kind of gate that process supply runs and laundry contractors and the occasional Afghan National Army liaison who showed up an hour late with paperwork missing a signature. My job that morning was to stand in the gravel, hold the clipboard, and make sure the world followed procedure. The world mostly did not. Private First Class Dante Reyes was supposed to be running the vehicle lane. He was leaning against the concrete barrier instead, eating something wrapped in foil that he claimed was a breakfast burrito and that I was 90% certain was just a flour tortilla wrapped around sadness. "You're not at your lane," I told him. "Sergeant Mack," he said, without looking up from the foil, "there are 0 vehicles. There have been 0 vehicles for 2 hours. I am maintaining operational readiness by conserving energy." That's not what that means. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what that means. I let it go. He wasn't wrong about the vehicles. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Keller, and I want to tell you right now, before this story goes anywhere, I was not the hero of what happened that morning. I was the guy with the clipboard, the guy who followed procedure, because procedure was the one thing between order and the kind of chaos that gets people killed, and I had seen enough of the second kind to take the first kind very seriously. I was 29 years old. I had been in country for 11 weeks. I had 7 more to go, which I knew because I had a paper calendar in my left chest pocket, and I crossed off each day with a ballpoint pen the moment the sun came up, a habit my mother would have found morbid, and that felt to me like the most optimistic thing a person could do. Mark off today. Tomorrow exists. That morning I had just crossed off day 77. The woman came through the civilian pedestrian lane at 0743. I noticed her first because she was alone, which was unusual. The pedestrian lane processed mostly local contractors, maintenance crews, cleaning staff, the food service workers from the DFAC, and they came in groups, usually 3 or 4 together, usually with a supervisor holding their badges. A single woman, alone, pulling a rolling bag was not what that lane was designed for, and the corporal running the lane, a 20-year-old kid named Harris with ears that stuck out from his helmet like open cabinet doors, was already looking uncomfortable. She was maybe 40, possibly older. She had the kind of face that had spent a lot of years outdoors, not by choice, but by circumstance, weathered at the edges, eyes set deep, the look of someone who had been squinting into difficult light for a long time. She wore a gray headscarf and a long dark jacket, and she was pulling a rolling suitcase, the hard-shell kind, dark blue, dinged at every corner. Harris was pointing at the bag. She was shaking her head. I started walking toward them. "What's the situation?" I asked Harris as I stepped up to the lane. He had his hand out, palm flat, the universal stop gesture that worked in approximately no language on Earth, but that we kept using anyway. "She won't open the bag, Sergeant. She's been shaking her head for like 3 minutes. Does she speak English? I don't know. Did you ask?" He blinked at me. I stepped back, Harris. I moved to the front of the lane. Up close, she was shorter than she had looked from a distance, maybe 5'2", and the rolling bag was heavy. I could tell from the way she'd been dragging it, the lean of her body forward and to the side, the bag riding up on one wheel. "Ma'am," I said. Then, because I had made myself learn 11 words of Pashto and 12 of Dari before deployment, and this particular word I had practiced because it was the one that mattered most, salam, something shifted in her face. Not relaxation exactly, just recognition, that she was talking to something with a face, not just a uniform. "Salam," she said. Her English, it turned out, was functional, not fluent, but enough. "The bag," I said, pointing to it. "We have to look inside. Standard procedure." She understood the word procedure. I could see it. That word crossed every language like a stone bridge, because bureaucracy is the one universal human invention. She understood, and she still shook her head. "Ma'am," inside she stopped. "Look for the word." pressed her hand flat against the top of the bag, the same way you press a hand over something precious. Inside is private. Private thing. I understand. But the procedure here, I understand procedure. There was no anger in it, just a kind of exhausted precision. I've come here 6 times. 6. She held up 6 fingers. Every time, procedure. Every time I open the bag. Every time, your soldiers look they are, she paused again. Not for a word this time. For something else. She looked at me straight. They laugh, she said. Every time. I stood there with my clipboard. Behind me, Reyes had stopped eating his tortilla. I didn't turn around to check, but I felt it, the way you feel when someone behind you has gone still for a reason that isn't boredom anymore. What's in the bag? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she unzipped the top of the suitcase, not all the way, just a few inches, and reached inside. She pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Dark green, heavy canvas with patches on the sleeve. A uniform jacket. Afghan National Army, captain's rank. The patches were worn but sewn on with the kind of care that takes time and a steady hand. My daughter, she said. She was Captain IIF Kabulko. She looked at the jacket. Not at me. At the jacket. She died 14 months ago. I keep her things in the bag. I bring them when I come here because another pause. Long enough that I thought she wasn't going to finish. Because when I carry them, she is still. She put her hand flat against the jacket, the same gesture she'd used on the bag. She is still with me. When I walk, Harris behind me made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. I had 7 weeks left on my calendar. I had crossed off 77 mornings. My mother sent me beef jerky and crossword puzzles, and I complained about the food, and I kept the calendar, and I went to sleep every night in a cot that was too narrow, and I woke up, and I crossed off another day, and somewhere 14 months ago, a woman who was someone's daughter had not woken up. I looked at the jacket in her hands. I looked at my clipboard. Then I made a decision that wasn't in the clipboard and wasn't in the procedure and wasn't, if I'm honest, in any manual I had ever read. Ma'am, I said, would you allow me to see your daughter's full uniform? She looked up from the jacket. I said it again, slower, and I made my voice do what my drill sergeant had always called presenting arms with the face, respect that you can see from 10 meters away. Not to inspect, I said. To see. She unzipped the bag, all the way. Inside, folded with more precision than anything I had managed to fold in 11 weeks, was a complete Afghan National Army dress uniform. Captain's rank. The jacket, the trousers, the beret, the service ribbons arranged in order on a strip of felt. A photograph, laminated, tucked against the side of the bag. A young woman in the uniform, smiling at something off camera. Dark eyes, strong jaw, the look of someone who is used to giving orders and had decided, in this particular moment, to be pleased about it. Captain Layla Ahmadi, her mother told me, killed in a vehicle ambush on the Kabul-Jalalabad road, November the year before. She was 28 years old. I don't know what made me do what I did next. I took a step back. I came to attention, and I saluted that uniform. Not a casual salute. Not the kind you throw at a superior because regulation requires it, and your arm is already doing it before your brain catches up. A real one. Slow. The kind my grandfather had taught me in his backyard in Ohio, where he had made me practice it for 20 minutes until I understood that a salute was not a gesture. It was a sentence. Harris had gone completely still. Reyes, behind me, had finally put down the tortilla. The woman with the bag looked at my salute for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, her face changed in a way that made me look away, not from discomfort, but from the feeling that some grief is not meant to have an audience, even a respectful one. Thank you, she said, quietly. The words like something she had been keeping somewhere for a long time and was just now setting down. Thank you, ma'am, I said, for coming through our gate. I logged her through at 0751. Suitcase inspected, contents noted in the log as personal items. AAF officer service uniform, deceased, no security concerns. She was a kitchen contractor, it turned out. She had been feeding soldiers on this base 3 days a week for the past 4 months. She had been coming through this gate with that bag, with those soldiers laughing. For 4 months. I filled out the full incident log when my shift ended. Names, Dates, the content of the inspection. The log went up to my platoon commander, Lieutenant Vasquez, who read it in about 30 seconds, and then read it again in about 3 minutes, and then didn't say anything for a while. "You saluted?" he finally said. "Yes, sir." He looked at the log. The uniform was for a foreign national officer. She was an Allied officer, sir, killed in service. He put the log down on his desk, looked at the wall. Reyes and Harris were both present? "Yes, sir." "Write it up exactly the way it happened." "Already did, sir." He nodded, picked up the log again. "This is going to go up the chain, Keller." I had expected that. I had not expected what up the chain would actually mean. I found out the next morning. The thing about a general showing up to your checkpoint is that the universe doesn't prepare you for it. You train for ambushes. You train for IEDs and vehicle breakdowns and radio failure and the specific particular nightmare of your interpreter not showing up on the one morning you actually need one. The Army has a manual, a field regulation, or a 3-hour class for everything that can go wrong in a combat zone. There's no class for general officer, unannounced, 0620 hours, you're drinking bad coffee from a paper cup, and your boots have mud on them from yesterday that you forgot to wipe off. I found out at 0600 that morning, day 78 on the calendar, when Vasquez pulled me off breakfast and told me to stand by at the gate. That was the full briefing. Stand by. He had the look of a man who had been told something 30 minutes ago that he was still sorting out and who had decided the most useful thing he could do was move the problem to someone else. That someone else was me. Reyes appeared at my shoulder at 0610, still chewing something. "Why are we standing by at the gate, Sergeant?" "Information unavailable, Reyes." "Is this about yesterday?" "Probably." "Are we in trouble?" "Unknown." "Should I have finished the debrief form better?" "I feel like I rushed the bottom section." "Your debrief form is fine, Reyes." I wrote the bag contained a uniform and also some feelings in the comments section. I turned and looked at him. "I'm joking," he said. "About the feelings part. The rest I wrote correctly." Harris arrived at 0615, ears pink from the cold, helmet slightly crooked. He stood at something approximating attention for about 40 seconds before the weight of waiting defeated him, and he shifted to something approximating casual, which was the best Harris could manage before 0800. We waited. The convoy came through the main gate, not ours, at 0624, and the ripple effect of a general-level visit reached Gate 7 about 4 minutes later in the form of a master sergeant I didn't recognize walking toward us with the precise, controlled energy of someone who has been awake for many hours performing comm on behalf of someone else. "Staff Sergeant Keller?" "Yes, Master Sergeant." He looked at my boots, at the mud. Something moved behind his eyes, but didn't reach his face. "General Harwick is requesting your presence in the TOC in 15 minutes. Clean up." He left before I could ask what the TOC meeting was about, or whether requesting meant requesting. I spent 11 of those 15 minutes finding the boot brush. Brigadier General Claudette Harwick. I knew the name the way you know names at that level. From briefings, from the unit history slides, from the kind of institutional memory that gets passed down from one rotation to the next like old field equipment. She had come up through logistics, which was unusual for a general, and which, according to every soldier who had served under her supply network, was exactly why her operations didn't run short on essentials at the wrong moment. She was known for 3 things. She could read a supply chain the way certain people read a room. She had 0 patience for performative behavior of any kind. And she had once, in a story that had been told to me by 2 separate people who claimed to have been there, made a colonel stand at attention for 6 minutes in the middle of a briefing while she reread a report he had summarized incorrectly. 6 minutes. Just standing there while she read. I thought about that story on the walk to the TOC. The TOC, Tactical Operations Center, smelled like circuit boards and burnt coffee and the particular recycled air staleness that comes from a room where people sleep in shifts. There were maps on every wall, radio equipment along one side, a long folding table in the center that had seen better wars. General Harwick was standing at the far end of the table, reading something. Not my report, something else. She had the same focused stillness I associated with people who had learned to concentrate inside noise because there was never any quiet available. She was in her mid-50s, I guessed. Black hair gone silver at the temples, cropped close to regulation. A face that was composed without being cold. The kind of face that had made a lot of decisions and was at peace with most of them. Lieutenant Vasquez was standing to the side of the room with the expression of a man who had already said everything he knew and was now simply present. I came to attention and reported in. The general did not look up from what she was reading for a moment. When she did, she looked at me the way a person looks at a thing they're not yet sure about. Not hostile, not friendly, just open and watchful, measuring something. "Staff Sergeant Keller," she said. "Tell me about yesterday morning. Not explain yourself. Not I reviewed your incident report. Just tell me." So I told her. From the beginning. The lane. The bag. The 6 previous visits. The jacket. What the woman had said. What I had done. I kept it factual. I kept it in the order it had happened. I did not editorialize, and I did not apologize, and I did not try to frame it as anything other than what it was, which was a checkpoint sergeant making a judgment call about how to treat a grieving mother with a suitcase full of her dead daughter's uniform. The general listened. She did not write anything. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, "You know, I had a daughter." The room got different. Not loud different. Not dramatic. Just the air in it shifted, the way air shifts in a space when a door somewhere has opened onto outside. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing, which turned out to be the correct answer. "Layla Ahmadi," General Harwick said. "Captain, AAF Kabul Corps. Killed November of last year." The name was already familiar from the day before. Then it arrived. Not immediately. It took 3 full seconds, which is a long time when you're standing at attention in a TOC with a general. 3 seconds of the pieces lining up, the name, the rank, the date, the gray-scarred woman with the bag, the way she had said my daughter with that flat, absolute finality of someone reporting a fact too large to carry any other way. General Harwick saw it land. She watched my face. "She was my goddaughter," she said. "Not my daughter. I misspoke. Or I didn't. I've been misspoken on that for 14 months, and I've stopped correcting it." She looked at the table, the report in her hand, back at me. "Her mother has been coming to this base for 4 months," she said. "Coming through that gate with that bag. I didn't know that. I didn't know she was still." She stopped, pressed her lips together once, brief and controlled, the reflex of someone whose composure is a practice thing and who maintains it because the alternative is not available in this room. I didn't know she was still carrying those. Then the general did something I had not been briefed on and could not have prepared for. She walked past me to the TOC door and asked the duty sergeant to have Mrs. Ahmadi. She used the full name, first name, and I heard the duty sergeant startle slightly at the familiarity of it brought to the TOC. "She's in the DFAC prep kitchen," the general said. "She'll be starting at 0700. The duty sergeant left. The general came back to the table, stood at the end of it, not moving. I had been in rooms with people carrying grief before. My grandmother, my grandfather's funeral, my buddy Torres in the hour after the vehicle hit. And there's a specific posture that grief produces in people who refuse to sit down in it. A kind of deliberate verticality. The decision to remain standing is the whole stance. That was General Harwick at that table. "What made you salute?" she asked. Not an accusation. Not even really a question. More like a thing she had been turning over since the report came up the chain. "It was the right sentence," I said. She looked at me. "My grandfather taught me that a salute is a sentence," I said. "Not a gesture." I didn't have any other sentence that was sufficient. The general looked at me for a long time. "Your grandfather was military?" "Korea," I said. "Sergeant first class. He died when I was 16. She nodded. Looked back at the table. "The soldiers at that gate who laughed," she said. "In her previous visits. I don't know who they were, General. I wasn't the duty sergeant on those rotations. That's not what I'm asking." She looked up. "Do you know why they laughed?" I thought about it. Honestly, not the easy answer. "Because a suitcase full of a dead woman's uniform is uncomfortable," I said. And when things are uncomfortable and you're 20 years old and you've been standing in a gravel lot for 4 hours, sometimes the thing that comes out is wrong. The general absorbed that. You're being generous. No, general. I'm being accurate. Being accurate about why people do wrong things isn't the same as forgiving it. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Something between appraisal and something else. Something that had nothing to do with rank. Vasquez, she said, without looking away from me. General, Vasquez said from his corner. Your sergeant has good instincts. Yes, General. See that they don't get trained out of him. Mrs. Amati arrived at 0648. She came into the TOC carrying her headscarf in her hands rather than on her head. A sign, I would learn later, of entering a place of some formality. And she stopped when she saw the general. The general's composure, which had held for everything up to this point, made one small crack. Not visible to everyone, but I was close enough. It was in the hands. A slight movement, the fingers of her left hand going to the edge of the table, touching it, the way you touch something solid when the ground under you is not entirely certain. Then General Harwick crossed the room and took Mrs. Amati's hands in hers and said something in Dari. Not a phrase from a manual. Something fluent, low, private. I looked at Vasquez. He looked at the wall. We both looked at the wall. Some grief is not meant to have an audience, even a respectful one. They kept us in the TOC for another 20 minutes, Vasquez and me. Not as participants, as furniture. We stood near the door while the general and Mrs. Amati sat at the far end of the folding table and spoke in voices too low for us to hear and in a language neither of us had more than 20 words of. The duty sergeant had appeared briefly with 2 cups of tea, which was the most human thing I'd seen in the TOC in 11 weeks, and then disappeared again. I studied the maps on the wall with the concentration of a man who is not listening. Vasquez studied the floor. At some point, Mrs. Amati opened the blue rolling bag, which she had brought in with her, and the general reached in and took out the uniform jacket. She held it for a long time, not examining it, just holding it. The moment had a weight I could feel from across the room. Then Mrs. Amati said something, and the general laughed. Soft, quick, private, the kind of laugh that lives in the middle of grief, the kind that surfaces without permission, the kind that actually sounds like relief. I did not know what had been said. I did not need to. Outside, after the air was doing what it did in Kandahar every morning by around 0700, warming up from cold to dusty, the temperature climbing that gradual ramp that always stopped about 15 degrees short of comfortable before deciding to overshoot into terrible. The gravel at Gate 7 still had puddles from the night's rain. The diesel smell was back. Reyes was at his post at the actual lane, which I noticed and chose not to comment on. Harris had corrected his helmet. I went back to the clipboard. The day was going to be ordinary. Supply runs and badges and the slow passage of a morning that did not require anything catastrophic for me. I was glad about that in the particular way you're glad about ordinary things when you've learned by proximity to their absence what they're worth. At 0730, my radio crackled. Vasquez, come back to the TOC when your relief shows up. My relief showed up at 0800. I went back. The general was still there. She was alone this time. Mrs. Amati had gone to the kitchen. Her shift started, and she was standing with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, looking at the maps. Keller, she said. General, sit down. This was unusual. Generals do not routinely invite staff sergeants to sit down in their TOC. Set. She turned from the map. Still held the tea. I want to understand your decision-making at the gate yesterday. Not the salute. I understand the salute. The decision to look. To ask her to show you the full uniform. I thought about how to answer that accurately. She said the soldiers laughed. I said, and I thought, if I asked to see it, the way you ask to see something you want to see, not the way you demand to see something you're required to inspect. It changes what the looking means. For her, you couldn't have known there was anything significant in the bag. No, general. I just knew there was something she was protecting, and that the protecting of it was important to her. The content didn't matter as much as the fact that whatever was in there mattered to someone. I paused. A suitcase somebody is trying not to open is usually a suitcase worth treating carefully. The general set down the tea she hadn't drunk. Layla was 28, she said. She graduated from the AAF Officer Candidate Program in 2019. I was at her commissioning. I pinned her second lieutenant's bar. She looked at her own hand like she was remembering the gesture. She was difficult in the best way, the kind of difficult that gets things done. She had the supply chain management instinct. She would have a small stop. She had plans. I said nothing. Her mother has been coming to this base, the general said, and carrying those items because she was refused permission to attend a memorial ceremony here after Layla's death. The paperwork for civilian family attendance was not processed in time. She missed the ceremony. She looked at me directly. She has been coming through your gate 3 times a week for 4 months because this is as close as she was allowed to get to where her daughter worked, to the last place Layla's unit assembled, the gravel lot outside. Gate 7, Gate Boredom, which was nobody's idea of sacred ground. I looked at the map on the wall, the base schematic, the southern perimeter line. Gate 7, a small mark on a laminated surface, as significant as a staple. She's been conducting her own memorial, I said. It came out flat, not poetic. I didn't mean it to land as anything other than what it was, a plain identification of what was happening. Every visit. Yes, the general said. She walked back to the table, picked up a folder, set it down. I want to do something, she said. For Mrs. Amati. Formally. A proper ceremony, small, appropriate, here on the base. With the unit Layla served alongside. With the respect that was supposed to have happened a year ago, and didn't because of a paperwork failure that she stopped. Pressed her jaw together. I want to do it correctly. I am asking you to be part of organizing that. I blinked. I'm a Gates sergeant, General. You are a soldier who had the instinct yesterday to treat a woman with the dignity her grief required, she said. That is exactly the qualification I need. I have enough people who can file paperwork. I need someone who understands what we're actually doing. I want to tell you I said something significant in that moment. Something measured and, right, a sentence worth repeating. What I actually said was, yes, General, because that is what you say when a general gives you a direction, and also because I meant it, and also because I was mildly overwhelmed and the shortness of the answer felt like the only safe option. She gave me to a major named Okonkwo, who was her aide, a 33-year-old Ohioan who moved through the base with the efficiency of someone who had learned early that the fastest way to get a general's attention was to solve problems before she noticed them. He handed me a 1-page brief within the hour. The ceremony would be 3 days out. Small. The remaining members of Layla Amati's former support unit, 4 Afghan officers, 2 of whom were still stationed at Salerno, would attend. A translator, the base chaplain, Mrs. Amati, obviously, and a folded flag, which did not technically apply. A folded flag is a gesture for American service members. Layla had been AAF, but the general had made a decision and put in the brief, and Major Okonkwo had nodded without comment, and so the flag was in the brief. There's no regulation for this, I said to Okonkwo, looking at the flag line. The general is aware, he said. She's doing it anyway. The general, Okonkwo said, with the flat calm a man who had seen this behavior before, tend to do things that don't have regulations when the regulations have failed to account for something important. I spent the next 2 days running between my gate duties and the coordination. There was a lot of it. The Afghan officers required their own separate set of approvals for enhanced base access. The chaplain needed a full briefing on the specific nature of the ceremony because it was cross-denominational and outside his standard protocols, and he handled this with remarkable adaptability for a man who had clearly spent the morning thinking his Wednesday was going to be routine. Reyes helped me without being asked. That was not a surprise. Reyes was the kind of person who showed up, who materialized at the elbow of whatever needed doing and contributed without requiring direction, which made him an excellent private first class, and which I had already noted in his quarterly comments, and intended to note again with more emphasis. Harris helped too, in the specific way Harris helped, which was to ask a lot of clarifying questions and then execute the thing correctly once the questions were answered, which is actually a perfectly respectable approach, and one I had also noted. Mrs. Amati, when Major Okonkwo informed her of the ceremony through a translator, said nothing for a moment. Then, she asked if she could bring the bag. Okonkwo told her the bag was welcome. She asked if she could bring Layla's photograph. Okonkwo told her the photograph was welcome. She asked, and this one required Okonkwo to check with the general, if one of the Afghan officers who had served with Layla could say a few words. The general said, not just a few words. He could say whatever needed to be said. The night before the ceremony, I sat outside on the step of the barracks for a while, which was not particularly comfortable, but was for some reason where I wanted to be. The calendar was in my chest pocket. I hadn't crossed off today yet. Reyes came out and sat on the step below me and didn't say anything for a while, which from Reyes was a notable act of restraint. You know what I keep thinking about? He said eventually. Tell me. She came through 6 times, he said, before us. 6 times with that bag, and those guys he shook his head. Not angry exactly. More like he had been sitting with something uncomfortable and hadn't figured out where to put it. Yeah, I said. They were probably just bored, he said, or it made them nervous, or they were 20 and didn't know what to do with it. Probably. That doesn't make it better. No, I said. It doesn't. He picked at the edge of his boot. You think she knew we were different? When she came through our lane, I thought about her face at the pedestrian lane, the exhaustion in it, the set of her jaw when she said, every time they laugh, the small shift when I'd said salam. I think she came through and tried again, I said, because she needed to come through, not because she expected anything different. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That's sadder, he said. Yeah, I said. It is. I crossed off day 79. Tomorrow existed. The morning of the ceremony was cold. Not unusual cold. Kandahar in that season had a specific morning bite that vanished by 0900 and left no evidence it had ever existed, like a thief working quickly, but cold enough that breath came out in small clouds, and the gravel at Gate 7 had gone white at the edges with frost that Reyes was standing on, shifting from boot to boot at 0600 when I arrived. You're early, I said. Couldn't sleep, he said. He was in his dress uniform, which I had not told him to wear. Harris was already at the gate too, also in dress uniform, helmet on straight for the first time in 11 weeks, ears still aerodynamic. I had told them the ceremony was at 0900 in the small outdoor area between the TOC and the chapel annex, which the base called the Assembly Green despite it being neither green nor particularly assembled. A square of hard-packed earth and gravel with a flagpole and 2 wooden benches that had been placed there by some previous rotation for purposes that had never been documented. I had not told them to be at Gate 7 at 0600. They were at Gate 7 at 0600 in their dress uniforms. I stood with them in the cold for a minute without saying anything. Then I turned and looked down the lane where the civilian pedestrian entrance was still locked, gate chain looped through the handle. She comes at 0700, I said. We know, Reyes said. She came at 0702, the blue rolling bag behind her, gray headscarf on, dark jacket against the cold. She saw the 3 of us, dress uniforms, standing at the lane, and she stopped. I had not planned anything ceremonial for this moment. There was no script for it, no regulation, no manual covering the specific event of 3 American soldiers standing at a gate in dress uniforms at 0702 to greet a woman who had been carrying her dead daughter's belongings through this lane for 4 months in exchange for laughter. I just opened the gate. Then I stepped to the side, and I let her walk through without stopping her. No clipboard, no procedure. No, ma'am, standard protocol requires. She walked through the gate. She walked through and looked at the 3 of us as she passed, and I don't know what she saw exactly, but her face when she passed did something I won't try to fully describe because I don't have the right sentence for it, and I've already told you what happens when I don't have the right sentence. I just watched her walk through. The ceremony was small enough to fit inside a normal morning without disturbing it. General Harwick had kept it to 14 people. Mrs. Amati, the 2 Afghan officers from Layla's former unit who were still stationed at Salerno, 2 more who had driven in that morning from a forward position, the base chaplain, Major Okonkwo, Vasquez, me, Reyes, Harris, a translator, and 2 members of the general staff who stood quietly at the edge. The assembly green had been swept clean, which meant someone had been out there before dawn with a broom, and I didn't know who it was, but I had a theory about who it was, and I kept that to myself. The general stood at the front in full dress uniform, ribbons in order, the particular posture of someone who has decided that this moment is going to be exactly right and has allocated the full weight of her authority to making it so. She spoke first, in English, the translator rendering it in Dari, and then in Pashto in quick, soft sequence, like an echo that arrived only a second behind the original. She spoke about Captain Layla Ahmadi, not the officer she had been, the person, the difficult, determined, plans-having person who had graduated officer candidate school and wanted to reform her country's military logistics and had opinions about inventory systems that she was not shy about sharing with people outranking her. The person who had borrowed the general's satellite phone once without asking and had apologized afterward with a specific unapologetic apology of someone who believed the end had justified the means and would do it again. The Afghan officers stood at rigid attention through this, the kind of attention that is not about regulation, but about what a body does when it is trying to carry something large. One of them, Captain Rahimi, senior of the 4, gave a eulogy in Dari. The translator rendered it afterward in summary because it had been long, and the summary took 4 minutes, and it was about a woman who had been relentless and precise and funny in the specific dry way of someone who knows more than she's saying, and who had once caught an error in an ammunition inventory that would have left a forward position resupplied with the wrong caliber, and had fixed it at 2 a.m. without telling anyone because she thought waking people up to praise her was a waste of everyone's time. The summary took 4 minutes. The full eulogy had taken 12. I looked at Mrs. Ahmadi during the eulogy. She sat on one of the wooden benches with the blue bag at her feet, and she listened with her eyes closed and her hands folded in her lap, and she did not cry during it, which I understood. There's a kind of grief that is past crying, that has gone through crying, and come out the other side into something older and quieter, a bedrock feeling that doesn't have water in it anymore. Just wait. Then the general did the thing with the flag. She had obtained, from somewhere in the base's ceremonial stores, a folded American flag. It was not Layla Ahmadi's flag. It was not technically appropriate. There was no regulation for it. The general stood in front of Mrs. Ahmadi with the flag triangled in her hands, the formal carry, point forward, the blue field showing. And she said something that the translator rendered as, "This flag does not belong to your daughter's country. It belongs to mine. But the soldiers under this flag are in your country because of the service of soldiers like your daughter. This is the closest thing we have to honoring that dead." She presented the flag. Mrs. Ahmadi took it. She held it for a moment. Then she looked at the general, straight at her, that level direct look I had seen at the gate on the first morning, the look of someone making sure they're talking to a face and not just a uniform. She said something in Dari. The translator said, "She says, thank you for keeping your promise." General Harwick hadn't made a promise to Mrs. Ahmadi. Not out loud, but she nodded like she understood exactly what was meant. Afterward, when the small gathering had dispersed, officers heading back to duties, chaplain folding his notes away, the assembly green emptying back into just an unremarkable square of hard earth. I stayed to police the area. Standard post-event procedure. Make sure nothing had been left. Make sure the space was returned to whatever it had been before. The wooden benches, the flagpole, the frost-gone gravel. Mrs. Ahmadi was still there. She had opened the bag. The uniform jacket was in her hands. She was looking at it the way she had looked at it at the gate that first morning, not seeing it, not examining it, just holding it with her hands while she was somewhere else entirely. I started to leave. Give her the space. She said, "Soldier." I stopped. She looked up. "You were at the gate. The first day." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the jacket. Back at me. "Why did you ask to see it?" Really, not what I had told the general. Not the clean version. She wanted to know the real one. I thought about it for a moment. "Because you protected it," I said. "Whatever was in that bag, you protected it. And the things people protect are the things that matter. I wanted to show you that I understood that. She looked at me for a long time. She would have liked you, she said finally. Layla. She did not like most soldiers. She thought many of them were. She searched for the word. Performing. She was probably right. She was usually right, Mrs. Amati said. It came out with a faint something in it. Pride, grief, the same word doing both jobs. That was the problem, and also the good thing. She folded the jacket with the same careful precision I had seen in the bag. The exact folds, the ribbons aligned, the beret placed just so. She put it back, zipped the bag closed. She picked up the folded flag, looked at it, set it on top of the bag, flat across the top, and stood with her hand resting on both. Then she pulled the handle up and started walking. At the gate, she turned once. Not a full turn, just half, and said something in Dari that the translator, long gone, would not have been there to render. I don't know what she said. I know how it sounded, like a door being gently, finally, closed. Reflection, I crossed off day 82 on a Thursday morning, for days after the ceremony, standing in the gravel at gate 7 with Reyes on his lane, and Harris with his ears, and a clipboard full of nothing unusual. The day smelled like diesel and wet gravel. A supply truck came through. Then, a contractor vehicle. Then, 3 maintenance workers on foot with their badges. The ordinary morning doing its ordinary things. I had 6 weeks left on the calendar. 42 squares of paper, 42 marks of the ballpoint pen, and then home. Ohio, my mother, my grandfather's boot brush that I had been carrying in my kit since week 1 and had genuinely used more here than I had ever used in Ohio. I thought sometimes about what the ceremony had changed. Not structurally. The gate was still the gate. The procedure was still the procedure. The clipboard still existed and required filling out. Nothing about the infrastructure of this place had moved. What had changed was smaller than infrastructure and larger than I have words for. There's a thing that happens when you're posted at a gate for long enough. A slow erosion of the individual faces that come through it. Not cruelty, not indifference, just volume. 100 faces a week becomes faces as a category, and somewhere in that reduction, the person in front of you becomes a checkpoint problem instead of a person. I had almost missed it with Mrs. Amati, not because I was cruel or indifferent, but because I was tired and because gate boredom was supposed to be boring, and because it takes an act of intention to see the thing in front of you clearly instead of seeing the category it belongs to. A woman with a bag. A procedure. A standard interaction. I had almost made it standard. The thing that stopped me was not training. It was not doctrine. It was something much older and much harder to institutionalize. It was the recognition that the thing she was protecting was worth protecting, and that how I responded to her protection of it would determine what kind of man I was in that gravel lot on that morning. I did not always make the right decision. Over 11 weeks and counting, I had been impatient, and I had been thoughtless, and I had failed at least twice to see the face in front of me, and had seen only the problem. I remembered both of those times more clearly than most of the things I had done right. They had that specific texture that mistakes have when you know precisely and without defense what you should have done instead. But that Thursday morning in week 82, the gate was the gate, and the clipboard was the clipboard, and Reyes was at his lane for once. And Mrs. Amati came through at 0702 with the blue rolling bag and the gray headscarf, and she stopped at my lane and pulled out her badge, and I looked at it, and I looked at her, and I said good morning. And she said good morning. And she walked through. No laughter, no theater, no ceremony. Just a person walking through a gate in the ordinary morning, carrying what she needed to carry, going where she needed to go. I looked at the badge long after it was out of sight. Then I turned back to the clipboard. 42 days left. The ballpoint pen was in my chest pocket. Tomorrow existed.